Hi friends, today we'll be going through a second topic that we'll be revising, and this is postpartum hemorrhage. And as we all know, this is a very important part of obs and gynecology, and we need to be thorough with this topic because we encounter this frequently in labor room, and hemorrhage is one of the leading cause of maternal mortality. If encountered, there are very effective ways to control it and to effectively do damage control. So we need to be thorough with this topic. And so without further ado, I'll get right back into it. So how will we be dealing with this topic? Will be basically in parts, that is, first of all, what is PPH? What is the definition? Then we'll be dividing it into primary and secondary. What are those? We'll be classifying the hemorrhagic shock. We'll be discussing causes of PPH, that is the 4 T's. And finally, the most important, we'll be going through the management. And management we'll be discussing, as we all know, in non-surgical and surgical ways that we can encounter. And over all this, I'll be going through various case scenarios that I'll be giving as questions, or maybe just practically discussing what case scenarios we frequently encounter in labor room. So so this is how I'll be dividing my whole topic on postpartum hemorrhage. I hope you'll enjoy and understand the topic. So right, so now I'll start it. Okay, supposing I'll start off with the case scenario itself. Okay, so we typically see a women in labor room, right? And supposing in this case scenario that I'm giving you, a woman who is approximately, supposing 32-year-old, and she is gravida 5 para 4, so she's multipara, with she delivered a baby boy of 3.8 kgs. The baby is absolutely healthy, and but what happens is that we find after delivery and after the placenta and uterus is out, that the uterus is flabby, right? Placenta and membranes are out, sorry. Very sorry. So the uterus is flabby and there is a gush of blood from vagina, right? So we straight away, what we'll do is we also check her vitals. So her vitals show that her pulse rate is up, shooting 110 per minute, and her BP is down, approximately around 98 by 60 mmHg, right? So what is your diagnosis and what to do? So these are the things that we'll be encountering and we'll be studying in this topic. So the thing is that what is the diagnosis is definitely PPH, right? What kind? Primary PPH. What is the cause? We know that the uterus is flabby. This is very important. So this is atonic PPH, which is the most common form of and the cause of PPH. And what to do? Now this is the question that we'll be dealing with, and we'll be answering this soon enough, right? So this is the case scenario that you actually encounter in your labor room, and you should know how to deal with this situation because this is quite the crucial moment. Okay, so now that we have gone through this case scenario, let's come down to the definition, because definition, as we all know, can be quite confusing in the regard of PPH. It has changed over the time. So I'll tell you what the definition we hold on to is that initially what used to be said was that, conventionally speaking, PPH used to be when blood loss was more than 500 ml in a singleton vaginal delivery, right? Then it over the time, then if blood loss was more than 1000 ml in multifetal pregnancy or twin pregnancy, vaginal delivery and normal cesarean section, then it was PPH. If it was more 1.5 liter in hysterectomy, then we used to call PPH, right? but now this is not the definition we encounter or we deal with. Why? Because you can't measure the amount of blood loss that is taking place in such a crucial moment. Like, how do you measure it? So we now go by visual estimation, or a much more thorough, reliable method, that is the clinical estimation. So what it is that any amount of blood, so any amount of blood loss which causes hemodynamic instability is PPH. This is now the golden definition of PPH. Any amount of blood loss which causes hemodynamic instability is postpartum hemorrhage, right? So besides that, people also say that there's another definition which is very important, that is blood loss after delivery from or into the genital tract which causes a fall in hematocrit by 10% or more than 500 ml is regarded as PPH. This is the WHO definition, right? The definition that this, which is the golden definition, is ACOG by American College. That is what we follow now, right? Because it is very difficult to actually sit down and measure the amount of blood loss the patient is going through while also trying to manage the case at the same time, right? Okay, so another a practical thing that is useful is how to do visual estimation of blood loss. So supposing you take a pad, a woman uses a pad, right? So if the amount of blood loss is just partial, then it is 30 ml blood loss, right? If it is completely soaked, then we call it as 100 ml. And if supposing the bed that she is on, the bed sheet rather, and if that is around almost fully soaked, then we call it as around 1 to 1.5 liter. And if supposing the blood is dripping down from her bed, then we can also estimate it to be 2 liters. That is how the amount of blood loss that you can visually estimate, right? So now that we have gone through this, I would like to go and discuss with you what is primary and secondary PPH, right? So okay, so as we all know, primary PPH is within 24 hours of delivery. And what is the most common cause of this? It is, as we discussed in the question, AFib. What is secondary PPH? So secondary PPH is after 24 hours up to 12 weeks. That is secondary PPH. What are the causes? There can be plentiful of causes, but the most common cause is retained products of conception, right? Besides that, you can also have subinvolution of placental site. There can be infection, there can be some coagulation defect, right? But retained products of conception is the most common cause, right? Okay, then we come to what are the different classification of hemorrhagic shock, right? So hemorrhagic shock classification. How do you know that the patient that you're dealing with has undergone mild, moderate or severe hypovolemic shock? So that we'll divide into 4 classes, as we all know. And to simplify it, we will take different values that we'll be classifying it with. That is the blood loss. If it is less than 750 ml, 750 to 1500 ml, 1.5 to 2 liters, and more than 2 liters. Then in percentage, it is less than 15%, 15 to 30, 30 to 40, and more than 40. If the pulse rate is normal, that is less than 100. If it is 100 to 120, 120 to 140, and more than 140, then BP is normal in first two classes. It decreases from third class onwards, right? Then the urine output, very very important. It is normal in first one, that is more than 30 ml per hour, then 20 to 30, then 5 to 15, and nil. If there is no blood in urine in urobag, then we say that the patient is in shock. Why? Because the output is nil, right? And finally the respiratory rate, if it is increased around 50 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, and more than 35. So this is basically the classification of hemorrhagic shock then that we take into consideration. A very important question that they might ask you is, what is shock index, right? So shock index is the ratio between heart rate and systolic BP, right? So what is the important cutoff? More than 0.9. If the value is there, then there is a need for resuscitation. Okay, right. So now that we have dealt with what is PPH, what is primary, secondary PPH, and what is the classification of PPH, we'll be coming down to the causes, right? So as we all know, the causes of PPH can be divided into 4 T's, right? 4 T's. What are these 4 T's? The first is trauma, then thrombosis, tissue, and finally tone. Okay. So in trauma, it will be any genital tract trauma, and in fact I'll be dealing with this topic under the birth canal injury topic that I'll be covering hopefully. So under that I'll be discussing the first degree, second degree, third degree tear, and the kind of questions that you can get around it. So that is trauma. Then thrombosis, any sort of coagulation disorders that we'll be dealing with is under thrombosis disorders. Any preeclampsia like HELLP syndrome that we encounter, that also comes under this. Any inherited or any hepatic dysfunctions, all of that comes under thrombosis. Then coming into tissue, it can be retained products of conception or it can be retained placenta. All of that will be covered under tissue. And finally tone. Now this is the most important because so it will tell you the different reasons why atony will happen, and this is the most common cause that I'll be emphasizing again and again. So this can be various causes. So let's deal with this. Right. So tone. Pardon my handwriting, it is atrocious, I know, but we'll try to work with it. Overdistension. Overdistension is, it can be multifetal gestation, or it can be that there is polyhydramnios, or the baby is big, that's macrosomia, or there is multiparity, or there is fibroid. Then we have an overdistension. Or if there is increased contraction during labor, that is excess of oxytocin, or there is precipitate labor, there is an infection, or there can be any anomaly. So any uterine anomaly will also lead to atony, right? So any malnutrition, anemia, prolonged labor, all of this will cause atony. Now coming perhaps to the most important part of it, that is the management part. Okay, now that I had given the case scenario and you were the doctor on duty besides your other 2-3 members in the labor room, so you realize that this person is bleeding and her uterus has no tone, it is flabby uterus. So what can you do? So first of all, call for help. You have to alert each and every team member and everyone available on floor that there is a patient who is bleeding profusely and you will need help. Why? Because there'll be a lot of things that you'll have to do at the same time, because time is crucial. So you can't be a one-man army, you need a whole team here. So what will you do next? You will give oxygen by mask around 6 to 8 liter per minute, and at the same time another teammate will be securing the IV line. That is, two large IV bore cannula will be used to one send sample, and very important to put blood on cross match, right? So send for hemogram, send for BGCM, cross match, so that you know that you are already alerting the blood bank that you will be needing blood for this patient as soon as possible, and also to send a coagulation profile to check that if there is any coagulation disorder that might have been missed or that is in progress right now, right? So that you will do. So this goes besides of course the fact that BGCM is being sent, that you have to arrange for blood products. That is very very important. Not just PCV, even fresh frozen plasma, platelet, whatever required, you have to store it and you have to alert the blood bank, right? Now another team member will be taking vital monitoring every 15 minutes, right? And so you had taken two large IV bore cannulas. With one, you had taken the sample, and preferably if blood is to be given. And with the second IV line, you will start the intravenous fluid then and there. It can be NS, it can be RL. And what will be the speed? You have to give 1 liter in 15 to 20 minutes. That you have to remember. So 1 liter has to be given 15 to 20 minutes. And so NS or RL is crystalloid, and we prefer crystalloid, which is also the RCOG RCOG guideline for replacement of blood and blood loss management, that we might discuss in future if you want to, or if that is a topic that I think is important enough to discuss in detail, I'll discuss it. So as of now, you're managing this patient, you've started the IV fluids, and the other thing that you will do is catheterize the bladder, right? So this is important. Why? Because you need to know what is the urine output, and it should be at least 30 ml per hour, right? But preferably it should be more than 50 ml per hour. Okay. Now you need to, besides this, you need to keep monitoring the patient and keep checking that she is she is conscious, she is cooperating. You have to reassure her, and you have to also start your drugs now, right? So okay, so very important in this is your uterotonics. So this was all the non-specific things that you have to do. We'll go over this again. You have to call for help. You have alerted all your teammates that there's a patient who is bleeding and who will need help. So you have started the oxygen there and then at 6 to 8 liter per minute. You have secured the IV line. You have started taking the vitals, you have started the fluids, and you have catheterized the patient. Now that we have done these things, we'll start with the uterotonics. Now the uterus was flappy, as we all know, so we need to give her uterotonics so as that her uterus regains its tone, and that automatically will take care of the bleeding. So what are the uterotonics that you can give? Okay, so one is oxytocin. Oxytocin is according to NICE guidelines, you have to give 2019, you have to give 10 units IV bolus, IV infusion. Never give IV direct oxytocin, right? And according to WHO 2018 also, you have to give 10 units, either IM or IV infusion. And according to ACOG, you give around 10 to 40 units per 500 ml infusion. So what we mostly give in an Indian setting is 20 units in 500 ml infusion, right? So this is what you'll be giving. Okay, supposing oxytocin you have given, and should the action should be within minutes, and if it's not showing an action, you will not wait and just watch. You will give the next eutotonic, that is the methergine. How much can you give? 0.5 milligram IM or IV, preferably IV, because IV takes the action is within 90 seconds, while IM can take around 7 to 8 minutes to act, right? So you'll prefer IV methergine, and but you have to keep in mind that there is some contraindication. The patient should not be eclamptic, no heart disease, right? And the patient should not be having any peripheral vascular disease. These are the contraindications to methergine, right? Then if this also does not help, or it is contraindicated, you can go for carboprost, right? So carboprost you can give as 250 microgram IM every 15 minutes and up to 8 doses. Okay, so this is carboprost. And finally, another drug that can be given is carbetocin, that is 100 microgram IV. And the best drug, at least in my opinion, is misoprostol, because it can be given, it is very cheap, it does not need any refrigeration storage as well, and just 800 microgram tablet has to be inserted per rectally. Why? Because the patient can't take orally, as the patient will be quite apprehensive, maybe even unconscious. And the other thing is that if you give it per vaginally, it will get just washed off with the blood. So per rectally give 800 microgram, right? Okay, you have done this, you have given all the eutotonics. What you will do next is you will look for genital tract trauma, right? Any trauma, if there is, you'll inspect her genital area, her genital tract, and see for any traumas. Okay, then you'll check the placenta. So you have to check the placenta for any for completeness, to see if there is any part that could have still be retained in the uterus, and that is why the uterus is not able to gain its tone. Okay, so these are the things that you will do. Then you'll go for some compression methods, that is non-surgical compression, right? So non-surgical compression methods is you'll do bimanual uterine massage, and the other thing is you can do is balloon tamponade. Okay, so this brings us to the very important or upcoming questions and things that we deal with is tamponade. So what are these tamponade? This is basically a Buckley balloon which has been specifically made for this managing of PPH. Its capacity is 500 ml. So as you can see, this is a balloon which is inflated and it is around 500 ml. So what we do is we first insert it inside the uterus, and then with the syringe we fill it up to around 500 ml, and this just it inflates inside the uterus and it acts as a tamponade. But if in low resource setting we are not able to use this, because it is quite costly. In India it costs around 10,000 per piece, and that is quite expensive, so you don't get it in government supply. So what you'll do is you'll use a condom catheter. Now this is very useful and very economical. What we do is basically we take a Foley's catheter. So as we all know, there is a Foley's catheter, right? So we cut 2 rings out of it so that we have elastic rings made, right? Now once this is, supposing, oops, my bad, partial, right? So we have cut this out. Okay, now what you do is you take a condom, right, and you roll it over this, and then you take these elastic bands that you have, you tie one around over here, you tie the other over here, and then you cut off this part, right? So again I'll cut off this part, sorry, right? So you have one tied over here and the other tie over here, and this is your condom catheter, and then you will fill it, and once you fill it, it will balloon up inside the uterus. So this is how it is, right? So this is where the tie has been placed. I told you that has been cut up from there, and this is your whole setup. This is your condom, and once you fill it with the liquid, this all balloons up inside the uterus. So this is a condom catheter. It is also called as Chhattisgarh balloon. So if someone asks you what it is, don't be afraid. It is just a mechanism to help you counter PPH, and it is made out of condom, which is also called as condom catheter. Besides that, we can also use Blackmore esophageal catheter that we use for esophageal varices. That too can be used, right? So this is how we'll be encountering the PPH non-surgically. So coming to the surgical methods. One is hemostatic suturing. That is B-Lynch. So how do we do B-Lynch? Is basically, supposing this is your uterus, you do a hysterotomy over here. So you make an opening, right? So you place your with the needle, you go in, out, and then you just go around the uterus, right? And then you come back, then you go behind again, and then you come in front, come back from this opening that you made out, and then you tighten this. So this is a B-Lynch suture, hysterotomy required. While in Hayman's, what you do is, you don't need to do hysterotomy. You simply go over this area, tie it up. Similarly, you go through the other area and then you tie it up. Okay, so this was Hayman's. You also have Cho square, wherein you make these ties in a square. Another is, which is very rarely heard, is Pereira. That is longitudinal and transverse. Both sutures are placed. That is, you go longitudinal and transverse both. So this is what we did for Hayman's, but over here we are also placing the transverse one, right? So these are the different sutures that you can place, and according to American College, the suture used is number 1, chromic catgut. Right. The other thing that you can do is stepwise devascularization. Now this is very important because people ask what are the vessels that you will devascularize and it in what order. So first we ligate one uterine artery, the side that we suspect is bleeding, and then we ligate one and then we ligate the other also. After that we ligate ovarian and uterovarian anastomosis, first of one side then both. Finally, the very famous anterior division of internal iliac. Where do we ligate it? We ligate it 5 centimeters distal to common iliac bifurcation, right? So uterine artery, ovarian, uterovarian, and finally the anterior division, but never the common iliac. You will not touch common iliac. Why? Because it is also supplying the lower limb. You do not want to compromise the blood supply to the lower limb, so that is why you will not touch the common iliac. Now one very common question that people ask is, does this affect the future fertility? No, this does not affect the future fertility. Okay, one very interesting thing over here, or rather not interesting, a very obvious question that people will ask is, tell the branches of internal iliac. Now I came across this very fun short form or mnemonic that can be used is, I like going places in my very own underwear. I know it's funny, but it works. It really works. It's fabulous. See, I like going. So your ILG is, one is iliolumbar, then is lateral sacral, and then is gluteal. G for gluteal. So that you will divide into superior and inferior. Then you have P places, that is internal pudendal. Then I is for inferior vesicle. M is for middle rectal. V is for your superior vesicle. O is for obturator. U is for uterine. Right, so from here to here is posterior division, and here to here is anterior division. Voila. So you know what are the anterior division of internal iliac, and over here we have the uterine. That is why we like the anterior division, right? Okay, besides our devascularization, what we can do is embolization. So what we'll do is we'll do uterine artery embolization, where we do a fluoroscopic identification of the vessel followed by embolization with gelatin sponges or coils or microparticles, and last is hysterectomy, which is our last resort. It is generally, if we are going to do it, early decision is recommended, and subtotal is preferred, right? Subtotal is preferred. So these were the different steps of controlling and managing PPH. I'll go through this again, a quick revision. Call for help, oxygen, by the non-specific things that you have to do. Call for help, oxygen, then 2 large IV bore cannulas, send for investigations, and quickly arrange for blood products. Vital monitoring has to be done every 15 minutes. You have to keep monitoring the patient, start the IV fluids and catheterize. Done. Then you go for the uterotonics. You will give her oxytocin. First of all, you start with that. Not working, methergin. Contraindicated, or if methergin also not working, go for corbeprost, or you can go for misoprostol, 800 microgram per rectally. Very, very effective. Then you will go for, if these things do not work, you will go for bimanual massage, and also you'll go for tamponades. Before that, you'll check for any trauma that has happened in the genital tract and the placenta for completeness, to know if there's any retained bits left. Then you will do tamponade by Buckley balloon or condom catheter, which I explained how you can make at that very point. And then finally, if that is not working, you'll go for hemostatic sutures. So this point onwards, you actually have to go to the can go to the OT, so that if these don't work, you can go for surgical methods like hemostatic suturing, which I explained, Beelench, Heyman, Choswer and Pereira. And if that does not work, you go for devascularization stepwise, which I've told. Uterine one side, then both. Ovarian, utero-ovarian and anastomosis one side, then both. Anterior division one side, then both. And never touch common iliac artery, because that will affect the lower limb blood supply as well. And finally, we went through what are the branches of internal iliac, and I hope you can keep revising it by actively recalling what we have gone through, because that is the most effective method for revising. So okay, now that we have gone through what is PPH, what is the management, I'd like to give you some more case scenarios besides the one that I discussed in the first part. That is, supposing this a 26-year-old woman delivered her first child by LSCS, right? So you are in the OT, the LSCS is undergoing, and supposing the placenta and membrane both are out, but uterus is atonic, right? And you start the bimanual, you have given the uterotonics, right? And you start the bimanual compression, right? But her pulse rate still is 116 per minute. Her BP is 94/56, and blood is on its way, what will you do? You will tie B-Lynch sutures, right, to counter till the blood comes in, till the uterus is because the uterus is not responding to the uterotonics that you have given, so you'll tie B-Lynch sutures. Okay. Supposing we go back to case 1, right? Supposing we go back to the case 1 I gave, and supposing the uterus is not flabby, it is actually well contracted, and you have the same scenario. What will you do next? See, it is PPH, it is primary, but this time it will be trauma. So you look for any trauma. That is the most common cause that you can encounter. So they'll be first degree, second degree tier, and what you can do, when should we repair. That I'll deal with when I'll be dealing the topic on injuries and birth canal. That too will be a very important topic. So I just want to inform you what are the other common causes of PPH that you should be knowing, because it's such an extensive topic that the other reasons need to be dealt with separately in separate topics. So you need to keep in mind the trauma, you need to explore it for any trauma that could be present. And another case scenario that can happen, that does happen, in fact even I've countered one, is where supposing there was a difficult delivery going on, vaginal delivery, and the traction applied was, supposing the difficult delivery and there was traction applied, right? And you see that now the pulse rate after applying the traction is around 60, but her BP has dropped. It has dropped drastically to 80/54 mmHg now, and you cannot feel the uterus fundus, right? So what happens? That is, uterine inversion has taken place, right? And what is the first the first thing that will happen after this is neurogenic shock. Patient can die of that also, or it can be eventually the hemorrhagic shock is the cause of death in uterine inversion patient, right? So you need to be careful about that. So these are different case scenarios that you will encounter, and PPH is, as I said, is a very important topic. So I hope you have gone through it with me, and you have revised the topic, and hope you like this. And if you want me to change anything or give you more case scenarios and anything else that you think that I should be adding on to these lessons or revisions that we are doing, do tell me. I try to add in as much as the latest guidelines are saying, so that it is helpful. And if there's anything else that you want me to do, kindly tell me in the comment section. And I hope this helps. Have a great day. Enjoy.